Welcome everyone to this year's Singapore FinTech Festival, and thank you for attending today's session. I'm Rashmi Delai, Director of Commercialization for MasterCard AP, and I'm here today with Sandeep Malhotra, Executive Vice President of Products and Innovation for MasterCard AP, and Dennis Koo, Managing Partner of Digital Future LLP, to talk about innovation in financial services. Many banks today are on innovation journeys to digitally transform their products and services, and these paths are full of potential pitfalls and risks. We'll open today with a short presentation from Dennis on why that is, and then dive into a discussion on how to navigate transformations more successfully. Sandeep and Dennis, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And Dennis, over to you.
Hello. We live in the fourth industrial revolution, where data, artificial intelligence, robotics, and the connected world are all coming together. Therefore, it's never been more important for companies to transform their businesses to adapt to this very digitized world. However, most digital transformations fail. In fact, depending on who you speak to, anywhere between 70 to 95% of all digital transformations fail to meet their objectives. And IDC estimates that of the $1.3 trillion spent in 2019, almost $800 billion have gone to waste. What are some of the reasons why digital transformations fail? Well, in my research and my experience, I found 5 reasons that account for most of these failures. The first is putting the solution before the problem. The second is an inability to manage the sheer complexity of such programs. Third is treating it mostly as a technology issue. Number 4, whatever is being created in terms of an idea moving to an innovation is neither desirable, viable, or feasible. And finally, as everyone knows, the lack of the talent to execute. Let's go through each of this in a little bit more detail. Solution before the problem. It's very common in the technology industry to be solution-oriented, to be invention-oriented. A very good example, as you can see on this chart, is the invention of the transistor in 1947. But it wasn't until 1954 that the transistor found its way into the transistor radio. And in fact, only in 1958 was the first integrated circuit created. And finally, a device that most of us know that powers everything today, in 1971, the transistors were finally used in microprocessors. So you can see it takes a long time, it takes many pivots to get from solution to be able to solve the many problems of the world. In the case of most businesses, this pivot is very difficult to orchestrate. And that's because most businesses are not in the business of pivoting technology to find the killer app. Businesses, after all, use technology to solve their problems. So in most cases, it is best to understand the problem before figuring what the solution is. Number 2, the complexity. As this chart shows, any digital transformation can be extremely complicated. There are so many ways that you can go about transforming the business, and together they create a complexity that is almost unmanageable. From the front of the house, where you're selling, you're personalizing, you're supporting the customer, to the back of the house, where you could be manufacturing, where you need to think of the supply chain, and you need to think of logistics. So the whole act of transforming the business is very complicated. And therefore, new methods, new ways of managing this complexity need to be thought through. The third area that I see most businesses grapple with is that they tend to think of the whole thing as a technology issue. Let me give you an analogy. If you were asked to build a building, you wouldn't first contact the builder. Most people would then First, think of the architect. Which architect could build this building? And the architect would spend a lot of time in the design process with you, understanding if it was a home, how you want to live, if you were creating an office building, to understand the future of work and what you think work would look like, how you think your staff would want to work. And therefore, in this analogy, the architect is the equivalent of the designer. And after the architect has designed the building, the civil engineer needs to make sure that the building can stand on its own. The civil engineer is the equivalent of the process expert. And finally, when the architect and the civil engineer have done their job, that's when the builders come in and build that fantastic building for you. And the builder is equivalent to technology. So as you can see, in any digital transformation of any scale and complexity, you need both the designer, the process expert, and the technologist. And all three of them have to be done well. And therefore, most companies that want to succeed need to think of it as a combination of these three capabilities brought together. The next area I want to touch on is that in bringing an idea to an innovation, you need to pass through three hurdles. And those three hurdles are desirability, how much a customer desires the solution you're providing to solve the problems that they are faced with, and therefore the extent to that they are willing to pay for such solutions. And once you get that proposition right, the next is really to think about how viable is that proposition. Can it make money, and can it be an ongoing sustainable business? And if you achieve both desirability and viability, then feasibility is critical, because feasibility determines the probability which you can pull the entire thing off. And most ideas don't make it. Most ideas fail either the desirability, the viability, or the feasibility criteria. And that's why it's very important for companies to ensure that whatever ideas they're generating meet these three criteria before you can say that it's an innovation. Finally, talent. We know that there's a large talent shortage in the designers, in the process experts, and in the technologists. And therefore, it's never been more important to look at how you hire. Yes, you need people in the incumbent organizations that have the experience and understand the business. But it's also important to bring people with the new capabilities that may not have those experience. And therefore, looking at attributes are very important. And those attributes, for example, persistence, the ability to think from a systems perspective, what we call systems thinking, so that you can handle the complexity, the courage to be bold, so that you can make those leaps and break those paradigms that plague existing businesses, or continuous learning, because there's a lot of learning taking place as you make the transformation happen, and those learnings can help you increase your probability of success. And finally, people who are responsible, who have the persistence, who communicate succinctly, and can produce great teamwork together. I've now covered the key reasons why companies fail in their digital transformation. Now, let's have a little chat on what are some of the finer points on three of these items. Thank you.
So Sandeep, we have just heard from Dennis an overview of some of the many challenges and risks that banks face as they engage in digital transformations. MasterCard is often a partner to many of these banks in their journeys. Do these risks resonate with you, and are there any that you see that we could expound on?
Absolutely, they do resonate with me. I do have a couple of comments to add to, and in my experience, what I've seen is that the risks get, increased when they are driven purely out of fear versus the organization need of wanting to better service their consumers. So I think that's number one. Mm-hmm. Second is, there is often a myth between, is digital transformation same as automation? So while automation is all about using technology to make the processes run by themselves or make the processes more efficient, digital transformation is about creating new value for the customers. So digital transformation is around changing the business to pursue new revenue streams, changing business models, and also to avoid disruption.
So both of you have raised quite early on in this conversation the importance of being consumer-centric, right? Designing to solve for real consumer problems. Dennis, maybe could you give us an example of a process that is consumer-centric led versus solution-led, and what are the differences in how those proceed and the steps that organizations take if they do one or the other?
Certainly, Rashmi. I think one of the things that most people start with is really the solution. Because a lot of executives attend a lot of conferences, a lot of consultants are also out there spewing out all kinds of solutions. And one of the most important things that these executives miss out is really a very thorough understanding of what is the customer problem. And often when I ask companies, right, what issues are the customers having, and what new insights have you found? And that could explain some of the behaviors that these customers exhibit. The executives are often, caught unaware of exactly what the customer issues are, and therefore this is a particularly difficult issue to solve because it's not a very effective process, right? You're not certain to get a definitive outcome by spending time with the customers. It's often a pretty random, erratic process, but it's something that I really think that you can't ignore and you can't sacrifice no matter how long it takes. Because for me, it's better to know the question because you can always pivot the answer than the other way around, where you know the answer, but you have no idea what the question is. And a lot of companies face this problem today.
And we often see this as MasterCard too, when clients come to us and they are looking to build new solutions. And we as partners try to help them engage in this struggle, in this dialogue internally. Do we have tools and initiatives and programs that we work with our clients to help address this?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with the partner exactly like how Dennis talked about. Figure out the problem, frame the problem, find out the problem, because the solution is in the problem. So what we do is we organize client workshops where we actually try to understand the problem, help customers frame that problem better, which they would have otherwise not framed it the right way because they would have sat in their echo chambers, listening to their internal dialogue. So we widen that experience. And I'll give you an example around that we have this digital first program, which we've created a playbook on, which we've created working with our partners, which actually goes from, defining an eKYC program to card issuance. So what pain points do you have to do eKYC? Could you actually do the KYC of the customer in real time? Could you do the underwriting of the customer in real time? Could you actually onboard that customer? Could you provision a card digitally and then, make that for usage in a matter of 2 minutes? So that's an extreme example of where we basically say, okay, we work with our customers, framing the problem, see what the challenges are, and then we solve for that. Because if you start with the solution, then there's always a problem. So start with the problem because the solution is in the problem. Now, when you've done these easy things, then you get into more innovative kind of, challenges which you will solve. So for example, you would actually, like we have worked with this bank called Mox Bank in Hong Kong, which created a flip, which is a numberless card, where the consumer can then choose their debit or credit card spending, whether they use it as a debit spending or a credit spending, all from within their digital application. So that's how we work with our partners.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with Sandeep more, because I think one of the things that helped me in the journey to build Tomorrow by UOB was really, we were really a bunch of Singaporeans trying to build a bank in Thailand, Indonesia. And in a way that forced us to do a lot more work with the clients to understand the Thais and how they live and how they bank, and similarly the Indonesians. I think if we had started in Singapore, we would have presumed that we know the problems, and it probably would have led to something that was really a lot less customer-centric.
So how do you encourage your teams and your innovation leaders to ask the right questions, to gain the right insights? Do you have a framework that challenges them to go beyond what we think is sometimes just fact and stop there, but actually move to the step of having something actionable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in my book, I really emphasize the starting point in the customer dimension. And the customer dimension consists of 5 very important steps. First, you need to decide what segments you want to serve, right? You can have more than one segment so that you can really decide which is the most attractive. And then you need to really understand the gaps. What are the expectations of the segment? As I recall, in building the first bank in Thailand, a lot of the millennials in Thailand had very high expectations. And the standard was K-Bank. And as you know, K-Bank is actually a formidable digital innovator and competitor. So the standards were very high. And then you have to understand the unmet needs, right? You have to understand the problems that they're facing and the habits that they have. And once you've gathered all the gaps, the most important step here is to really understand the insight. Now, what really is an insight, right? An insight is really an explanation of why the customer behaves this way. And there are really 5 important attributes, and I'll just name a few in the interest of time. One of them is that it has to be an explanation of why the customer behaves the way he does in a very simple and clear manner that can provide you with the impetus to progress towards a solution that can resolve the problem. Secondly, it's likely to be something that's not common sense, right? When you really discover it, you find that, well, this is counterintuitive. And that counterintuitive nature provides the fuel for you to differentiate. And the third element would be when your team discovers it, you have that eureka moment. You suddenly feel that all the pieces come together. And that is essential because what I find is that a lot of customers want to create new experiences but have no new insight. And once you have that insight, it's then very easy to design your desired experience. And once you design the desired experience, then you have this final very important piece, which is what's the business process? A lot of people ignore the business process because it's a lot of detail. But if you don't create a business process, you're not able to support the experience. And finally, when you actually digitize or use technology, it's really about making the process run much faster, more efficiently without mistakes. So that's how I would recommend clients do it.
So that raises a couple of different excellent points. One, coming back to the consumer, these past couple of years have been extremely difficult for even the most ambitious research team to keep track of everything that consumers are doing. But we at MasterCard have done a great job doing that. And we have seen a lot of shifts in digital behavior that have led to the acceleration of new products. Sandeep, could you just give a few examples of how the changes in consumer behavior, particularly in payments, has accelerated some new product launches and innovations that maybe would have been 10 years out if we had been in another environment?
So quantification of this payment digitization, which we've done through our consumer research, has definitely catalyzed a lot of change and innovation in the banking ecosystem. I mean, with this data, many of our partners actually have gained the confidence to move into these new digital first propositions. So what we do is, for the starters, we offer them contactless as a mechanism which the consumers are looking for, a safe and hygienic kind of a commerce environment. But those who are slightly more mature, some of the things which we have done which were not as compelling 2 years ago, but they're looking at digitally innovative solutions. So we worked with InstaRem, for example, and they are a financial and a payments arm of a Singapore-based fintech called Niem. And we've created a product called Amaze. And what it does is, it actually is a decoupled card where you link your up to 5 different cards from other banks, and then you use this one central digital way to transact. So now you don't need to think, for this particular transaction, buying an airline ticket, which is not happening these days, or groceries, I would use this card versus that card. So you use just one instrument, and then you can figure out what's the card behind that is. And then in the next wave, you look into innovation around how do you basically transact in a safe, secure fashion. So whether it's biometrics or even going into behavioral data as to how you type or how you interact with the content or how you hold your phone is how we are basically getting into the next step.
So all of these innovations sound amazing, but I also know that many banks are in some ways and pieces still many generations behind these exciting edge technologies. Coming back to the point you made about processes, when you go to implement a solution, the solution's not just technology-led, it's organization-led. Right. So how do you, but oftentimes when business leaders start to think that way, immediately the scope of the project widens when you start to think about processes and change management and culture and all the other elements. How do innovation leaders start to get their arms around the real scope of the digital ambitions and create ways to tackle them?
I think part of what these executives who are tackling digital transformation issues and looking at the sheer scope is that they need to make sure that they can deal with ambiguity. There is no need to solve everything at one go. And part of it is then understanding, where they can make the biggest impact. And I think that's where design is very important. So the essence of digital transformation is really the triumvirate of design, process, and technology. And it is in the design phase that you basically look at the entire scope of what you need to do and what's manageable and where are the focal areas that you really want to focus on to improve the customer experience. And the design phase also results in the understanding of what are the design considerations. So for example, what are the areas that you really want to simplify? And again, a side example from the experience building the Tomorrow Digital Bank, one of the areas we looked at was really how to make the app very simple. Now, you can imagine this is very difficult because there are millions of apps around the world trying to make the experience simple. And one of the things we looked at was the understanding of how menus work. And menus, if you think about it, are really the designer's way to force you to navigate the way he designed it. And the insight we got from there was really that if we then reduced menus, the whole navigation would become very simple. And that's what we did. The mantra was really to reduce menus throughout the app. But of course, in reality, what we did was remove a lot of the first level menus. They all became icons in the app. And the result is a very easy to use interface. So the design phase is very crucial in identifying some of these key considerations. Because if I had just told the team to make a simple app, it would be very different from telling them to create an app that basically has virtually no menus. Once you do that, it's not time yet to start technology because you've got to work out the process, right? The entire journey has been mapped out. And once the journey is mapped out, you have to really understand existing capabilities, what part of this experience can you deliver? And the missing capabilities you need to push the envelope on the experience so that it becomes much better and so that you have a very high, much higher experience score and can attract the advocates that you want.
And we often see this in our role as partners to banks in helping them implement more multi-rail payment strategies. A lot of digital platforms now are trying to provide the array that consumers enjoy paying with in one centralized app, but that's challenging. It's part of the design challenge that Dennis referenced. From a multi-rail implementation strategy and a payment strategy, how do, again, the process changes, the organizational changes start to catalyze and flow through successfully so that companies can really leverage this technology and not just get lost in the technicals?
Yeah. That's a good question because multi-rail payment strategy is very, very important, and especially for the banks and other partners we work with. And now they have to look at things in a much more holistic way. Because if you look at the consumer is basically going to use different payment instruments where they transact, whether they pay or receive money from another individual or business, a merchant, a corporate, a government. They're going to have these experiences. Now, bank needs to think beyond just issuing a card, issuing check, issuing cash, into getting into these experiences, which Dennis pointed out, which needs to be more holistic. So today what happens is, depending on the use case you work on, the experiences are very fragmented. In some cases, you pay by a check. In some cases, you pay by a wallet. In some cases, you pay by your bank account. In some cases, you pay by a card. And you could actually bring all those together in a holistic fashion so that the bank's marketing and operational kind of bandwidth gets applied at a more broader level. So create a relationship with the customer rather than issuing individual products, basically, which are meant for specific purpose. And when you do that under the auspices of a digital bank or a banking experience through a digital banking platform, you actually would be able to create that relationship with the customer, and they will trust you as a provider, of those services.
And I would imagine that trust then helps banks to then build bit by bit, as both of you are talking about, that you can't necessarily go out of the gate with everything, that you need to incrementally provide these services step by step and then build in real time with the insights they give you and the progress they build. Which brings me to my next question. So we're living in an era that the world's calling the Great Resignation. There's lots of demand for technology talent. All of these ambitions are based on people and being able to bring in teams that can make this a reality. How are you as innovation leaders, and I'll start with you, Dennis, how do leaders address this talent gap that so many companies are facing and still realize their ambitions?
Well, I think you have to start with a great story. You have to have a good narrative, right? Because there's no company today that isn't thinking about how it can thrive in a world where robotics, AI, data, and the connected world are all coming together. So there's great demand, but there's insufficient supply. So your narrative has to be really good because otherwise you're not going to attract anyone. And once you have a good narrative, I think you're going to have to think about how you're going to blend incumbents that have the knowledge, the domain expertise, probably the business skills, but they're kind of confined in a paradigm that the industry has found itself to be in. And you're going to have to mix that with people that you can bring in that have the right attributes. For example, in process, you need people who are going to go to the nth detail. They are really going to be very fussy about the small little bits that make the experience very great. And in design, you're going to have people that can break down complex things to simple problems. You're going to have to identify the order, the priority, right? What problems that you can solve are going to have a bigger impact on the customer and what are the smaller ones. So you can determine what the minimum viable product or the minimum experience score needs to be. So by combining an attribute and trait-based process for external hires, and also an internal team that can understand the context of the industry. And then the leader needs to basically make sure that this bunch of people that are probably from different backgrounds, different viewpoints, can coalesce and work very well together. And that's the job of leadership, right? To really get the collaboration and teamwork going. So I think if you can do that, you have a good chance at overcoming the traditional means of trying to attract people, and you can still come out tops among that great shortage of talent that exists in the market today.
And at MasterCard, we do quite a lot to address the talent gap, particularly because our talent is our core asset, as it is in any organization, but particularly as a consulting and a client partner organization. How at MasterCard are we viewing that talent challenge and cultivating internally and externally our teams?
So number one is training, right? You want to make sure that people are learning as they go along, whether it's on the job or it's self-driven kind of a training. So we offer programs which are online courses or even tuition support to actually gain university certificates and degrees. I actually myself got a couple of.
And that's a great point, because I think now it's really about continuous learning.
Yep.
On the project, on the transformation, you're learning all the time. So that's a great point that Sandeep's brought up.
Yep, I'm also doing that too.
and then the second is competition. You want to keep them engaged. You want to keep like a vibrant environment rather than this 4, 5, 6, 8 hours of job.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? So we do that at different levels. So throughout the year, we run a competition. And the latest competition which we ran was with the interns who actually created idea, pitched idea, tested idea, and it was around payments during space travel.
Wow.
That was pretty impressive. They were very happy about it. We were able to retain some of them. And then for the more experienced crowd, we are looking into creating pitching of new ideas, which then they will fight for investments around resources and funding for an idea which will go to the labs, which will incubate, and then in due course of time, it gets commercialized. So we're keeping that. And then when we talk about talent, what kind of a talent you need, to Dennis's point, you don't need domain specialization all the time. You need a few of them to make sure that they validate and invalidate what you're trying to do, because that comes with the industry experience. But you want to bring in people who are not from the same domain. They bring in attitude, they bring in aptitude, they bring in problem-solving skills, because those are more important, because you can train them in 90 days. And then at the same time, you want to embrace out-of-box thinking. You want to encourage diversity of all kinds. And then you want to promote experimentation. And failure, you need to accept failure, not
That's a great
punish
point,
it.
yeah.
I think that's very, very important.
And I think to build on what Sandeep is saying, a lot of companies are trying to figure out, right, do they hire from outside? Do they hire from inside? And I think the key is that you need both, right? You're not going to succeed if it's all internal. But if you hire all external, they often don't understand the industry context. They don't understand how the industry makes money, right? And in the end, yes, you can have a great experience that costs so much that it's not viable. So the key is really in getting both groups to work well together.
I know there's a lot of talent out there that are enthusiastically embracing opportunities to have these pivots into new industries. So I think the fact that organizations and people are meeting minds on that front is really exciting. So finally, as we get to the last step, the solutioning piece, you finally have your problem statement, you have your insights, you've got your team assembled. Are there any closing thoughts on what banks should do in terms of best practices as they shift then into solutioning and execution? How do they keep motivation going, programs on track, and products to launch?
Well, in a program of this nature, it's extremely complicated. So you have to adopt new ways of doing things. So one of the key areas to look out for is really methodology. And I would say that the three key methods that every bank would need to master is really around the design and design thinking methods that help you really get the right desirable solution. And then you really need to think about how you're going to use techniques like Lean and Six Sigma to really create a process that's really efficient and effective. And finally, you need to transform the way you write code. So you need to think through how you're going to basically get the code done in a much more agile way. In fact, you can have, in our case, multiple teams that are coding at the same time and thinking through very carefully the release. And it's really a continuous release kind of manner rather than doing all the coding, then doing all the testing, right? And really in a much more rigid and waterfall manner. Getting these three methodologies together really creates the software factory. And I think that's critical to making sure that you can execute correctly.
And in engaging partners like MasterCard, we also have a powerful role to play in helping accelerate change or helping modulate different parts of the process. What are some best practices that we could offer our banking customers when they come to us or they seek partners in their digital transformation journey?
Yeah, I mean, work closely with the customers. I mean, make sure you help with them in, again, framing the problem. Don't make them, listen to their own echo chambers around the same kind of internal dialogue, because most of the time the organizations say it will never work or has never worked and, not in this lifespan. So you challenge that, and that's where, you continue to partner and bring in external entities and try to share all that knowledge. Is the key mantra. But the end result is, I think you want to create better value for your customers, better outcomes for your customers, and that will help you pursue new revenue streams.
All right, well, thank you so much, gentlemen, Dennis
Pleasure.
and Sandeep, for sharing your insights and your experiences today. And thank you everyone who joined us today for the session. We invite you to stay afterwards for a Q&A. And we also invite you to check out Dennis's new book, Driving Digital Transformation, Lessons from Building the First ASEAN Digital Bank, available on Amazon. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for attending today's session and welcome to the live Q&A segment. Please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A Slido box on your screen. We'd love to hear from you and answer them. Also, at the end of our conversation, we'll be giving away Dennis's newly published ebook, Driving Digital Transformations, Lessons from Building the First ASEAN Digital Bank, to everyone via an emailed link and redemption code. So please stay with us till the end. Welcome, Sandeep and Dennis. It's great to continue our conversation here. Sandeep, I'd love to kick things off with a question for you. When engaging in innovation and digital transformations, focusing on creating new products and services is often primary and natural. New energizes teams, creates a sense of opportunity, and motivates change. But some of the most impactful innovations and improvements are on the old or existing. These can reduce a key friction, make a service easier to adopt, or even improve the marketing story. So how can innovators know when the answer they need to look for may not be in making a new product, but improving what they have?
Thank you, Rashmi. It's a very interesting question. So innovation is not about creating, new products basically all the time. I always use this phrase as renovation is another form of innovation. And you can actually improve on things which you already have, and that itself, works. Because often when you create new products, the big resistance which you feel is, people are very, very tough to change habits. Their consumer behavior is very hard to change. So we launched digital product, we launched contactless for a long period of time. And it took some time for consumers to see the value and adapt to it. And it started becoming much more natural when they saw it on their everyday purchases, whether they went to a grocery store or transit, where speed was important, then they saw the value. But then there were other markets, it never took off, right? And what happened for an event like COVID had to happen for that behavior to change, whether people started believing in scanning or tapping their phones or cards. And so very hard to change the habits to drive adoption. Now, we often do surveys to find out, will people use a new product? Will they use it often? Will they pay for it? And, will they continue using it? But we don't actually look at what is the friction which is out there in the adoption in terms of, what is causing them to not adopt a new product. We should make that as a part of the survey. So an example of that is this fast fashion industry, who actually was always working on designing new kind of clothing, but they actually did some homework in terms of what was preventing people from buying new clothing. And then they figured out it was mostly around people, when they buy new clothes, they also think about what are you going to do to get rid of the older clothes. Gone are the days when the clothing will go bad. It just looks stale. So what do you do with that? So they figured out a way, how do you recycle those clothes, recycle them in an environmentally friendly way. And that actually worked. And now they are back to, looking at how do you solve frictions like this beyond just creating new designs in an environment where they're creating work from home designing of the clothes. So if you look at those kind of problems, I think that's the key thing. And again, back to this, renovation is the new form. Innovation is the easiest way of driving new products.
It's a very clever solution from fast fashion. And Dennis, we spoke a lot about in the session about the digital transformation journey, but refinement also has a place in that journey, which can be geared towards designing new things, but also needs to have this process of reducing friction as part of it. How do you incorporate that as you move forward with ideation and product building?
Yeah, Rashmi, I think that's a very important aspect, because if you look at the project, right, the project's kind of the part of the iceberg above the water, and the refinements are all that big part of the iceberg below the water. So it's absolutely critical. And today, as you know, things are very competitive, right? So whatever you can do, the competitor is probably copying it. So I think refinement is a very important, and it's a very hard piece, because you tend to be able to keep the team well gelled during the project, right? Because there's a definitive launch, right? There's a lot of visibility, but after the launch, right, it's not so definitive anymore. It's more diffused, And it's quite hard to keep the team focused on being very customer centric. And most organizations, as you get larger, right, you be like what Sandeep was saying, you become very internally focused, right? Your conversation tend to be very internal. So the first thing about refinement is ensuring that you stay very close to the customer. So I recall one of the things that I did was insist that everyone who worked directly for me attend the research. And because it was in a different country, in a different language, you had to have simultaneous translation. And we set up a system so that you could log in and listen to that translation of exactly what the customers were saying. And that's absolutely critical first, to get very close to what the customer is giving you the feedback. The second big source of feedback is really the points of contact with the customer. And in the case of a digital bank, that is your chatbot, your chat agents, those are, so analyzing those things, right? What the chatbot is able to handle, what it can't handle, how is it escalated? Those are all very important input for the refinement process. And again, it's back to what I talked about in terms of process, right? It's the attention to detail. So in my book, I talk about the fact that it's really nitty-gritty, right? So many banks, the audience can go and check this out, right? If they're receiving a PIN, right, a second PIN, how many of the banks actually put the PIN first versus put the PIN at the end? Because if the PIN is at the end, then what you get is a lot of text message telling you, that you shouldn't reveal this to somebody else, but the PIN is not there. Right, then you got to exit from your app, go to whatever is the text message app, open that, memorize the number, come back and key in. Right, now imagine this replicated, right? These pet keys replicated 50 times, 100 times over your entire application, and that's very likely because you probably have not caught every single thing that needs to be done to really refine the process. And one of the very important things that I also articulate, right, is that from the point of launch to the point of time that you can negate your annual fixed costs, you still need to improve your net promoter score or your advocacy, right? Using net promoter score as kind of a proxy for advocacy. Because when you first enter, you might have, let's say, my recommendation, double the industry, right? But as you try to gear towards neutralizing your annual fixed costs, you need a lot more customers. And therefore, if you don't raise your net promoter score experience, you might end up having to basically incentivize more. And when you incentivize more, you might fall back to a negative marginal contribution, which brings you back to step one. So this continuous refinement is not just about the ethos of customer centricity. It's absolutely critical for your experience to keep going up, and focusing on a lot of these inefficiencies also reduce your costs. So in that sense, it's absolutely pivotal to not only the fact that you are making it even more desirable, but you are also making the business more viable because it's more profitable, because it's more efficient. So focusing on this refinement process is absolutely critical. And I think one of the things, also additional distraction after you launch, you begin to need to run the business, right? Not just build the business. This introduces additional complexity. So keeping focus on the refinement is actually very, very hard, but it's actually something very critical for the most senior executive responsible for the program to insist that people stay very focused on the journey of refinement. It's a continuous journey now. You don't have sustainable competitive advantage anymore, right? You need to keep fighting for that competitive advantage. So I think it's a great question and a great one to really focus those of you in the audience who are doing your own transformations to really keep that in full view.
Thank you. Those were both great responses. And I'm going to shift now to some questions from the audience. So anybody out there who has something you'd like to ask us, please, again, make sure that you input it in your box. Sandeep, I think this one is aimed towards MasterCard. What do you think about the future of the credit card industry with a lot of alternative payment tools like e-wallets, buy now, pay later coming into the market? What should a credit card issuer do to prepare for these changes and be future ready?
Yeah. So an amazing question. So I would say it's just the most important thing is the relationship with your customer and choice to the customer. How do you maintain that relationship is through choices, where the customer should come to you, where you become a more of a lifestyle platform for the customer. Whether you do bill payment, which is paid by a bank account, whether you actually do a payment for taxes, whether you pay to a merchant, whether you pay to an individual, whether you pay to anybody else you could think of. And the whole idea is that if you create that experiences, whether it's paid from a bank account, a wallet account, a crypto account, or a card account, I think that's very important. So that's the story for the issuer, and that's why they will keep on coming to the platform. They will trust you and they will be engaged with you. Now, what should a credit card issuer do as if like buy now, pay later is taking over the world? It is an amazing kind of a thing which is happening, something to watch out for, but it's not new. The credit card experience is called buy now, pay later. That was created 50 years ago. And the issuers have been doing this buy now, pay later for more than hundreds of years. Okay, so it's nothing new. Now, the way it's being done with the new providers is slightly different, and it's mostly around the experience. So, in the past, when a buy now, pay later transaction would happen, that you buy something on your debit card, credit card, or whatever instrument you used, and your issuer will basically send you a post facto notification saying you have, about $100 or $500 worth of purchases. Do you want to put them on X number of equal installments for a small amount of finance charge? Now, you had this feeling of post facto, did I make a mistake? I had a guilty feeling. I should have thought about it earlier, better cash flow management. So now that experience is changing into you can decide before the transaction, after the transaction, and then some of these new entities and the fintech players are saying during the transaction, when you actually look for a item, when you discover a product such as buying a hat, and the hat is like $15, you can put it on 3 equal installments of $5 each. That is amazing, right? So yeah, yes, the issuer can do that at the point of checkout or product discovery. That would be that would be quite interesting. And now this new experience is going down to, rather than doing this open to buy, it's going down to a transaction level or even a product level, meaning that you can buy your shirt in full and you can buy your trousers in part. So these experience part is where the credit card issuer would look like, whether they pay again to an individual, a biller, a corporate, a government, or a merchant. If they do that experience from all kind of payment instruments from within their same digital interface, which would be m-banking, internet banking, or whatever digital banking platform they're using, I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, Rashmi, I'll just perhaps add to that I think one of the big difficulties for banks is really that you have to be able to do the onboarding very quickly, because if you don't hold an existing card, right, then how are you going to get access to buy now, pay later? So one of the things, again, is back to how you create the onboarding process. Can you do it in 10 minutes? And therefore, the customer who's at the checkout can in 10 minutes get onboarded and actually get credit. So I think that's the big change, that's also happening.
Thank you, Dennis. That's a good one.
Future's got a lot of new customer experiences and choice ahead. That's going to be a big part of these strategies. Over to you, Dennis. We have a question about digital transformations within banks. What is the most effective way to drive digital transformation within a bank? And I know you have a lot of information on this from your book. Do you need a cross-functional task force? Is there a good project time frame? What are some of the things that people have to keep in mind as they drive that forward?
Well, for a bank that's really transforming its entire way it operates, acquire customers, right? In other words, creating a digital bank, it is very complicated. And you're likely to have many streams of work, right? Potentially 15 different streams of work across, for example, an onboarding stream, a credit stream. You probably have a transaction kind of stream. You have someone that's taking care of the timelines of project management. You obviously have technology, you have operations. There's a lot of stuff that you need to take care of. So you need definitely to design the streams, but you're not just following, the functional departments, right? Because then it might not be the best way to construct it. So the way I think about it is to understand, number one, what is it you want to do? And I think the objective then decides how you structure the unit. And part of the thinking that I propose in terms of the objective is really think of it in 3 ways, right? You really need to get very good at the transactional banking piece. That's basic. You need to get very good at the support piece and giving people better service. And then finally, you need to be very good at using data to become more proactive, to make the experience, the engagement even better. And when you understand that that is really your competitive advantage, then the next step you should think about is, okay, what are the breadth units and what are the depth units, right? You need depth to solve the very tricky problem. So, if you are going to do onboarding in an almost instantaneous way over the wireless network, right? And then there's congestion. So you need to think of compression. You need to think of how you can strip some of the information. Maybe you don't do video if video is involved 2-way, you do it only 1 way. So all those things need depth. So that's a depth organization, right? And technology tends to be a depth organization because they are the ones that need to come out with the capability. But you also need breadth organizations, right? Because you need to string all these depth units together, because otherwise they all go their separate ways. And the breadth units tend to be the people, for example, looking after project management, the people looking at the design, the people looking at customer experience. That cuts across. So you begin to understand, therefore, what are the breadth units, what are the depth units. If you are doing it across the region, then you need to think of the countries, what are the country roles, right? And in ASEAN is particularly difficult because every country is different culture, different language, different norms, different payment systems. So you also need to think through that. So it's definitely going to be cross-functional, but it's, to me, not the traditional cross-functional units that the bank already has. It's thinking that through. And for example, if you then relate back to the differentiation you need to produce, right? You might have a team focused on engagement, right? Using data to engage customers, because that's a new capability, and that one is depth. You might even need a unit that combines both breadth and depth to move faster, right? For example, if you are going to pioneer a unit that can really experiment with different ways to engage with customers, then you might want that unit to be self-contained and not rely on other units, right? Because that tends to slow that unit down. So I would think of it this way, in a step-by-step methodical manner. What are the things you want to achieve at the end to differentiate? Based on those differentiation, what capabilities you need, and in those capabilities, who belongs more to the breadth and who belongs more to the depth. And then from there, you draw up the org chart. And when you do it that way, then it is really very much designed to solve the outcomes that you are doing the transformation for. And project time frame, I would say that, again, if you're doing the most complex version in terms of bringing a digital bank up from scratch, the build is probably in the first instance, right, going to take anywhere, depending on the sophistication and capability of the organization, probably anywhere between 1 to 2 years. And in terms of being able to negate all your variable and fixed costs, right, I would say that you're generally looking at anywhere between 4 to 5 years, unless your parentage, your DNA is very good, and your mother is able to imbue on you a whole bunch of very digital savvy customers that immediately want to sign up. Other than that, and most of us don't have that good fortune, it's likely to be in the 4 to 5 year time frame before you can even talk about negating the original capex cost that you've put in. So it is a long haul thing, but again, you might want to think about it as in the sense that if you don't start now, then it's going to be very hard to compete with someone who has been learning how to use data to engage customers for 5 years, because you'll be 5 years behind.
You touched there on the DNA of the parent organization, and we have a follow-on question that talks about resetting the mindset that's needed for digital transformations within local banks. And this question can apply the word local to regional banks as well. So beyond creating strategies that just serve, the technology lip service or provide superficial changes, how do you actually reset the mindset to make these digital transformations successful?
I think it probably is a question that has a long answer, but I will focus on probably what is the most important aspect of this, right? The question is, why are you doing it, right? Don't do it because someone else is saying that you should do it, because then it is likely to be lip service, no matter how you craft it, because you don't really believe that it's going to be important, right? So therefore, why is important? The most important question. And I think one of the key reasons why, right, is that, for example, right, and this changes depending on your situation. If you are a large incumbent bank in a geography that has a lot of underbanked and underserved, what you will find is that the attackers are likely to attack from the bottom of the pyramid. And they're likely to have high experience at much lower cost than you. And because banks have a technological core that keep improving, right? You will find that they're going to move up market. And when they move up market, they're going to squeeze the incumbent. And the incumbent will get so squeezed over time that they will begin to lose share. And you cannot wait 10 years to respond, right? You are not in a position to respond in 10 years. And in a lot of industries where this disruptive innovation has happened, and many very famous people like Clayton Christensen have studied this, the incumbents are always at a disadvantage, because for the incumbent wants to protect their most important customer who's giving a lot of profit, because that's where the profit is being generated. And the bottom period doesn't do that. So they seed the market. When they seed the market, they then don't realize that it comes back to bite them later. So why I'm talking about this, because I think the burning platform needs to be very clear. Why are you doing it? So now if you understand that, then the major incumbents in markets that have large, underserved and unbanked, they then know that, hey, this is a big threat for me in the 10-year time period, and I need to do something now. Then they're not going to have lip service. The other aspect is then understanding that digital banking is not digital bank, right? And if you understand that, then you have the other burning platform that I cannot defend against a digital bank attacker using digital banking. And given that we only have 2 minutes left, I will let the readers read the book to understand the difference a little bit more. So understanding why you're doing it is critical. I mean, you shouldn't do it because everyone else is doing it, because then you have no purpose and you'll be all be lip service.
So another follow-on question is, in your personal experience, what was the biggest challenge you faced while launching Tomorrow, and what things were kept in mind to scale it to more countries?
The biggest issue you're going to face in building any digital bank is the sheer complexity. So many streams of work, many different considerations. You've got to think through the customer, right? I mean, you're not going to find any one thing that is going to make customers sign up with you in most cases, right? And again, you're not likely to have a parent like in the case of Kakao Bank that can imbue very significant advantages for you to acquire very quickly. So if you're an incumbent bank, then one of the things you need to think through is how do you handle that complexity, right? You need to know your customers very well, right? You need to understand how you're going to differentiate. You need to understand the path to profit. You need to understand how you're going to scale. You need to understand the core competence gap. You need to be very good at designing. You need to imbue new methodologies in organization to create a software factory. You need to understand where the data is. So it's extremely complicated. And I think that was the biggest challenge. So for me, leading the whole program, I think understanding how to manage complexity and ambiguity is key. Otherwise, the whole thing will go haywire because everything affects everything else. So that was basically, I think, the key thing that kept me awake.
All right. Well, we're at time. So thank you very much for your comments and thoughts. We had some questions that weren't able to make it to the session, but Your book, Dennis, has a lot of the answers. So we invite everybody to use their redemption code that you'll receive at the end by the end of next week to purchase Dennis's book, Driving Digital Transformation. And we thank you very much for your time and for attending this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.